The Presbyterian Church USA, okay, so this is a major mainline denomination in the United States. There are two articles here on the Christian Post. I just find one of them interesting. It says, PCUSA loses 1 million members in the past 15 years. So for a denomination to lose 1 million members, because usually they just keep people on the membership list whether they've attended church or not. So for them to actually lose and acknowledge that they've lost 1 million members, that's pretty significant. And maybe this is why they're losing so many members. This next story, PCUSA approves amendment banning LGBT discrimination. Now that's how they're framing it, but what they're actually doing is they are kicking out all pastors, they are kicking out all ministers who hold to a biblical view of marriage. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 19. And we won't even go to Old Testament passages because they'll play this game like, well, we're Christians, we follow Jesus, we don't listen to anything in Leviticus or anything. So we're not even going to, we'll just give them that for the sake of argument, and we'll just look at what Jesus says. So Matthew chapter 19 is the passage that Jesus expresses his view, which really is obviously the biblical view. It was the view that God gave to the nation of Israel. This is the Lord's view of marriage. And he says in let's start in verse 1 for the sake of context. Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished these sayings that he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them there. And the Pharisees also came to him, testing him, and saying to him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? And of course, back in those days, women, if a man divorced his wife, women didn't exactly have career opportunities. So if a woman was abandoned, she may not be able to care for her children if she has them. This really put women in a very bad position. So some Jewish men were just divorcing their wife just because, for no reason at all. So they're asking Jesus about this, and he says in verse 4, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. So this is a passage where they're asking about divorce specifically, but in this question you see Jesus' view of what marriage is. First of all, he says, in the beginning God made two genders, male and female, which was not controversial at all until 15 minutes ago, right? So male and female, and this is the biblical view of marriage, one man, one woman coming together. So one man, one woman for life. I think most of you have heard that the Christian view, the traditional view, the biblical view of marriage, one man, one woman for life, right? Okay. Now divorce, and that's a separate issue, but just to establish that this is clearly the church's view of marriage, and it has been for the past 1900 years. Now this is where we go to the PCUSA. So they have passed this law or amendment in the denomination where if that's your view, let's say you're a Presbyterian pastor in this denomination, if your view is that marriage is between male and female, one man, one woman for life, if that's your view, you are now going to be kicked out of the denomination. Why? Because you don't affirm polyamory, where maybe, not just two women or two men, but maybe one man and six women, or, I guess polyamory would be one man with 2 husbands and 3 wives, just a blending. See, if you're not affirming of all of that stuff, you're going to get kicked out. Okay, so this is a pretty bold move by the PCUSA, and it clearly goes against what Jesus taught. Do you think that has something to do with why they've lost 1 million members, that they've been headed in this direction? It says in 2011, which is, what, about 15 years ago. In 2011, that is when the denomination made a decision to ordain openly LGBT pastors. So that happened in 2011, and since that time, the denomination has lost 1 million members. So, the connection is there, whether they want to acknowledge that or not. And I just find it interesting, the statement at the end of the article. It says, the PCUSA ratified an amendment allowing ordination of openly LGBT pastors at the discretion of each congregation in 2011. Before last July's General Assembly, over 100 clergy signed an open letter opposing any requirement that clergy candidates be asked about their views on sexual orientation and gender identity, saying that it appears to introduce an ordination question that is deeply at odds with our core Reformed tenet of freedom of conscience. This amendment would immediately disqualify and exclude many faithful and dedicated ruling elders, teaching elders, and deacons from serving due to their convictions, the letter reads. Moreover, it risks imposing a non-negotiable and rigid standard on an issue where faithful Christians hold differing views. So these are ministers and people in the denomination. They're not even looking to fight the denomination on the direction they're going in. They just say, hey, can you respect my conscience? I'm a PCA, deacon, ruling elder, pastor. I don't agree with you, but I'm not going to fight you. But our church is part of your denomination, and we believe traditional marriage. Can you just allow us to exist in the denomination? And the ruling is no, you're going to get fired, you're out, and maybe the whole congregation would be kicked out. Which, if the denomination owns the building, then they can literally kick people out and sell the building or bring in a new. So they have complete control over some of these churches. So it's just a sign of the times. But by their own ruling in 2011 and this other news story, this type of thing has led to just a mass exodus of people just leaving the church. Why? Because once you abandon God's standard, once you abandon the teaching of the Bible, what do you have left? I mean, you have a social club, right? You have a group of people who gather for some other reason other than to worship according to, the historic Christian faith. And I think people know that, and that's why they're leaving. So this falling away from biblical teaching happens in stages. For example, if you look at the book of Acts, the persecution that occurred with the apostles, first they were told, don't preach in this name. Then they were put in jail, right? Then they were beaten. Then they were put in prison, then they were finally killed. So it happens in stages. So right now, people are trying to get this church to just be more tolerant. Okay, we're not asking you to change, just become a little more tolerant of these other views. Well, this isn't going to happen, but let's say over the next few months, we decided, we're going to loosen up and we're going to be more tolerant. We don't agree with it, but we're not going to make a big deal about it, and we're tolerant. Okay, now that we were tolerant, what's the next step? Well, now you need to be affirming. Okay, it's not enough to just whatever and tolerate it. Now you need to agree with it. Okay, so if they could get us to agree with it, if they asked us, do you believe this? Yeah, okay. The next step is now you need to promote it. Now you need to put the flag out front. and show the world that you agree and you're promoting it and telling everyone. And then the final step, once you get the tolerance, the acceptance, affirmation, promotion, the final step is to persecute anyone who disagrees. And that's where they're at. So we're right here where we need to be, fighting the good fight of faith, even though it's not popular, especially in Leverett, it's not popular. But we need to be, but the PCUSA has now reached that final phase where they are now actively persecuting people who believe. Are they being tolerant of the other position? See, no, they don't really want tolerance. That's just the hook that gets you to pull you in that direction. Now, we're not at a point where people are being put in prison. However, there are people in other countries who are being put in prison for this. Ireland, I think England, there's been at least 1 or 2 cases where pastors have been put in prison for preaching and speaking openly about controversial moral issues.